Hello and welcome back to my channel. Welcome to my channel if this is your first time. This is the 5th episode of my Bookshelf Essentials History Department videos, where I pick 20 history books that I think are essential to any collection of history books. So it's coloured a little bit by my studies and my degree, and some of these books I've mentioned before. I think I've mentioned this one before. But this is an absolute treasure. I absolutely love this book, partly because I love the event so much that the book is written about. But this just a stunning collection of primary sources, all collected together. It's an absolute, an amazing thing. And the actual event itself is something that I think is deeply fascinating and doesn't get talked about nowhere near as much as it should. And this is the Peasants' Revolt of 1381, a very dramatic and, as I say, fascinating moment in English history, where a group of peasants rose up against the king and formed this large movement that eventually marched on London to confront the king about their conditions. And the demands that they made were incredibly forward-thinking. They'd even be seen as forward-thinking now. It's amazing that this was right back in the 14th century. A little bit of context. The reason why it happened was because the peasants had a lot more agency with them because of the Black Death that had happened in 1348. And the subsequent devastation on the manual resources all across Europe, but across England, it affected the landowner's ability to say to a peasant, "Oh, well, if you can't do it, someone else will." Basically, they couldn't say that anymore. Then the peasants started thinking, well, hold on a minute, our conditions are crap, so I suggest that we change these conditions. And Wat Tyler was the man who brought these things together and brought all these people together and actually managed to get somewhere in trying to get better conditions for the peasants. And it's an amazing story in English history, and something that I think, if you don't know anything about it, definitely look into it. But this is the best book on it. It's an amazing book. There's a number of good books on it, to be fair, but this is such a brilliant book because it's a really thick collection of articles and primary sources about it, and the material is mostly from the time, but it's collected by R.B. Dobson, and R.B. Dobson was a university lecturer. Where was he lecturing? Hold on. Does it say? He's a senior lecturer in York University, and he taught at Magdalen College in Oxford and at St Andrews University as well. And a very celebrated historian. So I was just going to read you a little bit of this general editor's preface. So it says, in this volume, Dr. R.B. Dobson examines in depth one of the most dramatic and celebrated episodes in English and European history, the Peasants' Revolt of 1381. Here, for the first time, are made available sequences of evidence in depth which enabled the reader to reconstruct the crisis for himself. The volume stands as a vital contribution to the history of medieval society and to the history of pre-industrial revolt in general. The core of the volume is the revolt itself, the social and economic experience of the 14th century peasantry, too complex to lend itself to full documentation, finds expression in a number of significant documents, statutes, petitions, chronicles, and poems, which give the reader a grip on realities, and in the documentation bodies out into a vivid, rich, complex, and contradictory narrative, a reliving of experience, almost a symphony of discord. The structure of the book is narrative. The reader can read the story for himself. The most striking feature of this narrative is the wealth of sources employed. 4 or 5 chroniclers, often contradictory, are brought to bear on every important incident, significant and often colourful evidence is presented from government and judicial records. The first outbreaks over the poll taxes, the risings in Kent and Essex, the celebrated entry into London, and the death of Wat Tyler are covered in all their fullness and complexity. The great bulk of the material has been newly translated, and often for the first time, from the original Latin and Norman French. The scope of the collection extends to detailed coverage of the risings in the eastern counties, and to areas which have in the past escaped the historian. Perhaps most striking of all is the reconstruction of the repression, not only from chronicles but from commissions and individual trials, and the recovery of tradition of peasant struggle, with a suggestion of comparison with the German revolt in the 16th century, which I will get to later in another video. And then there's a thing here that says that a final section on interpretations of the revolt ranges from contemporary comment through Gower, Burke, and Thomas Paine, to William Morris and Frederick Engels, and adds a whole dimension to the reader's perception. The study of history, it has to be said, should read documents until he hears their authors speaking. Here on the President's Revolt, and for the first time, he can do just that, and directly for the literature of protest, the dark and enigmatic songs of rebels are given him. We are the people of England, says Chesterton, that never have spoken yet. Here, some of them, in a hurling time of our history, find voice. The contents page gives you an insight as well into what you would find in the book. So it's got altogether it's over 400 odd pages, and there is 7 parts to it. First part, the background to the Peasants' Revolt. So it's got like some context of the character of the English, the population layout, the poll tax, the Black Death of 1348 and 1449, the enforcement of the statute labourers, the petition against vagrants, political protest of 1376. So like the background that leads up to it. Part 2 is the 3 poll taxes and the outbreak of revolt. The first poll tax was in 1377, then there was another one in 1379, and then there was one in 1381, and then the first outbreak was just after that. There's some details about that. Part 3 is the rebels in London in June 1381. So this is about the activity that was happening in London in 1381, and look, loads of different perspectives of this as well. And then part 4 is the rising in the eastern counties. So you've got Bury St Edmunds and Norfolk and lots of places like that, in Cambridge, the rising in Cambridge. Part 5 is elsewhere in England, and you've got St Albans, the Bridgewater Rising, the riots at York, Scarborough, Beverley, Chester, and Worcester. All these different places that had peasant uprisings at this time. Part 6 is suppression and survival. The suppression of the revolt from different sources. Loads of different sources here, and they're all like kind of couple of pages long. And some of the trials that happened. Another kind of counter revolt. So more revolts happen in Norfolk and in Kent and in London. And then part 7, the last part, is interpretations of the Peasants' Revolt. So as that introduction said, you've got opinions from people like from Engels and Thomas Paine and Edmund Burke and William Morris and Geoffrey Chaucer as well is listed as a source here as well. So it's absolutely brilliant book, really is. If you are curious about the Revolt, it's that is a very famous painting of Wat Tyler's confrontation with the king. So it's quite a nice little cover as well. If you can get hold of it, by the way, I don't even know if it's available anymore. But this is the first edition, so it's quite nice. So yeah, The Peasant Revolt, 1381, edited by R.B. Dobson. Stay curious, everybody.